registered dietitian at the New York University Langone Medical Center's Comprehensive Epilepsy Center in New York, with 13 years of extensive pediatric clinical nutrition experience. She works with patients of all ages, but specializes in pediatrics at the inpatient and outpatient clinical levels. What is a registered dietitian, and what is the difference between a registered dietitian and nutritionist? Because they're very different.
Yes. So a registered dietitian is somebody who's been through a rigorous amount of coursework in order to gain that credential. So RD is a national credential, just like RN, just like, DO, DM. There's an actual board certification behind the RD. A nutritionist, unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of parameters defining who a nutritionist is. So you can go out tomorrow, take a few nutrition courses and say, I'm a nutritionist. And there are even states that don't mandate that you have your RD in order to practice. So,
what is, for those that don't know, the ketogenic diet, but primarily for those that have epilepsy, not just, what you read in the media and, the fasting and everything else that goes with just, the mainstream ketogenic diet that people know of.
Right. So the ketogenic diet, when we talk about ketosis or, getting into ketosis, we're really referring to a metabolic shift in our body's metabolism. So we primarily use sugar as an energy source, which is carbohydrates. They break down into sugar in the body. We also use fat and protein, which break down into amino acids, and fat break down into lipids, which then are converted to ketones. So the end product of fat digestion are ketones.
Right.
The body will always use sugar as its primary energy source. And unless we force the body to use a different energy source, such as fat or protein, it will just keep on using sugar. So the ketogenic diet restricts sugar in the diet in order to force the body to use fat. That creates a state of ketosis. So it's kind of this broad name for a ton of different metabolic pathways that change when we change our metabolism. So different hormones are increasing, other hormones are decreasing, but mainly the main, to simplify it as much as I can, because it's a very complex process, ketosis is the body changing from using sugar as its primary energy source to using fat as its primary energy source.
All right. So, and we'll talk about specifically the keto diet and epilepsy. But so when you see a patient who's been referred by Orrin or Dr. Devinsky or, anyone in the Epilepsy Comprehensive Center at NYU, how do you assess the patient and then develop a ketogenic diet plan, quote unquote, to treat their epilepsy?
So this, is probably the most extensive step of what we do, other than the support that we provide for the families. But when we meet with a patient initially, we spend anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours with them, kind of going over all of the history. Do they have allergies? Do they have food preferences? Is the diet going to work for this person lifestyle wise, as well as based on the types of seizures they're having and the medications that they're on? So a lot goes into it. We sort of put our heads together with the team and see, do we think this patient is a good fit for the diet?
So, okay, so there's tons of recipes and great food that somebody on the diet can have. Can you just give a few examples? I know there's tons of examples, but just, give like a few, I guess 3 different types of meals that somebody who is on this diet can have.
So, first and foremost, when it comes to the diet, I know the diet is used a lot for a lot of different things now. The keto diet can be pretty intense, and it's really not suggested for people who don't have epilepsy or a neurological condition where the diet has shown promise. There's a lot of studies happening right now with different neurological issues, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism. There's all different focuses with the diet. So, anybody who's starting the diet for a non-medical reason, we don't suggest it. It's not something we, a lot of people are using it for weight loss. It's like a bodybuilder type thing. But anybody starting it for a medical condition should always do it under the supervision of a registered dietitian. So I just always say that before I'm going to give examples of meals. So, a typical day for our children on the modified ketogenic diet would be something like eggs with bacon and avocado for breakfast. Maybe they'll be able to have something like a slice of a low carb bread. So there are flax breads out there, there are almond flour breads out there that they could definitely have. So it really will depend on their preferences. We can make, ketogenic pancakes using macadamia nuts and eggs. The food has come a long way in people's creativity.
So what are some of the unique challenges that you face as a dietitian?
So the most
just give me two. I know I'm asking a lot of broad questions.
Well, the most unique thing a problem I face as a dietitian at the Epilepsy Center is trying to manage food preferences, allergies, with the diet's restrictions in themselves. So, our society is really, really focused heavily on food. We use food for celebration. We use food for commiseration. We use food when we're happy, when we're sad. Food is at the root of everything that we do. People have very complicated relationships with food and their bodies. And I think that's really the most challenging part of being a dietitian, especially in today's culture.
So we spoke a little bit about this, but I guess to maybe just get the short and sweet of it, how does the keto diet treat or co-treat with medication seizures?
So there's a few schools of thought, and it hasn't really been well researched because it's sort of a difficult thing to research. But the belief is that this shift in metabolism from using sugar to using fat as our main energy source sets off a different metabolic pathway. There's a whole cascade of hormones that are triggered when we eat. So when we eat carbohydrates, insulin, which is an inflammatory hormone, is increased. Insulin then triggers other inflammatory hormones like cortisol. When you're not eating excess carbohydrates, you're really not getting that whole insulin cortisol pathway. So that is suppressed, and that will create an anti-inflammatory state. So that's one theory. Another theory is that the ketones are able to pass through the blood-brain barrier. There's not a lot that can pass through there in terms of nutrition. Proteins don't pass through the blood-brain barrier, only sugar and ketones can. So the decrease in sugar reabsorption through the blood-brain barrier and the increase in ketones, they think can change neurotransmitter activity. So there are a few different schools of thoughts, but essentially the take-home message is this shift in metabolism from using sugar to using fat as your main energy source does something in the body which tends to, suppress seizure activity in some people.
All right. And then lastly, I guess what message or what advice would you give to parents who who basically have a recent diagnosis of epilepsy? They're seeing X, Y, and Z epileptologist. When do you think they should ask their doctor about the ketogenic diet? Not everyone is like Orrin, that's like, oh, maybe this should be, maybe
Correct.
You should do the keto. So when should they ask and inquire about it?
I would do that before you even pick your epileptologist. So for me, if I'm looking for a neurologist or an epileptologist, I'm going to look for somebody who is a bit more progressive with the newer therapies. I would also want to make sure, even if it's not something this epileptologist is comfortable for, does their center offer diet? Does their center offer adjunct therapies? Like, have they done any trials with medical cannabis? Where are they in the forefront of epilepsy treatments and research? So that would be an important first step in picking my epileptologist. Then it would be one of the first things that I spoke about with my my care provider. I would really want to know, what are your thoughts on the adjunct therapies out here? I think it's really important to be open to what the doctor suggests. So, you may be anti-medication, you may be pro-medication. these epileptologists have been practicing for many, many, many years. So you have to trust them on some level. But I think it's really great to get their take on, where are you with diet? Would you try it first? Would you try it after we failed medication? What are your thoughts? If they're not in line with your thoughts, you should probably find another practitioner. So if you go to somebody and you're like, listen, what if we fail Keppra and, Felbitol, where are we going to be at? And they're like, well, we'll try these 5 medications. I wouldn't try diet until it's a last resort. If that's not in line with your thinking, then you should find somebody who will visit some of these alternative therapies sooner. Right. With that said, we generally recommend, the rule of thumb is that you try at least 2 medicines before you begin the diet. And that's only because the diet is an extreme lifestyle change. So, as a parent, I can see how difficult it is to just feed a toddler who is picky, let alone on a restricted diet. So the caveat to that is that the earlier you start the diet, the easier it is. So if you have an infant, you're just changing a formula. If you have, a baby who's just starting solids, they're already eating purees. It's not a huge lifestyle change. The older the person gets, the older the child gets, the more difficult it becomes because they develop preferences, they develop a personality, and then they're at social engagements, which make it even more difficult. So it's a very tricky question. But it would be one of the first things I brought up with my practitioner, hey, where do you stand with the diet? If you're planning to start the diet, you would want to do it sooner rather than later. If you do fail, 1 or 2 medicines, because the sooner you start it, the younger your child is, the better. And you also have to make the determination of whether you're willing to put in the work to maintain the diet. So there's kind of a lot of factors that go into it, but it's something that I would definitely bring up within your first few meetings of where do they stand on some of these alternative therapies, because they can be extremely useful. And you don't want to feel like you got, 3 years down the road and didn't know that this was an option for you. You want to know what your options are right from the get-go.
Absolutely. Well, amen to that. Mazel tov. So this was wonderful. You're great, Courtney. So thank you so much.